Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. It's good to have you here, Danielle. Hello, hello, hola, hola, hola. Ooh, I'm trying to get my hands warmed up. All the typos in the pre-chat before we went live. My hands are so cold. I'm doing finger exercises just so that they warm up. Anywho, so I've been preparing for this live for the past, let's just say, 2 days. It's quite interesting during this time of year when we don't have enough daylight. Temperature margins are narrower as well, so a lot of time slots have to be manipulated and considered. So yeah, this has taken a little bit longer, but while I am so sorry to read that, Robert. Hand hearts to you. Oh my goodness. Oh, please take care of you and anything that is going on. Oh, thinking of you, Robert. Oh dear. Hang in there, my friend. Ooh, okay. Sorry to try to transition back to. That warmed me up just now. Okay, let's transition back to. Oh, this is hard. All right. Um, yeah, so thank you, Robert. Thank you. Hugs, hands, heart, and anything vibes. Oh, all right. Okay. While I transition, I'm going to say one. When you hear me say one, would you please put a one into the chat? Okay, so one. Okay, so we have an 11-second lag. All right, that's good to know. Not good for the flow, but it's good to know. Okay, because tonight we are attached via a cable to the internet, and I was hoping it would be a direct connection and everything be much faster, but that is not the case. Anywho, so I'm going to shut off the YouTube side of the operations just to make sure that anything that was to happen, that we can get the flow going. Okay, so anyway, yeah, what we're going to do is, in actual fact, while I was preparing for this live, we're going to split it into two parts. I was going to do all the popular media for orchids in one live, and as I was going through it, I thought, no, we're going to go and do organic tonight. Tomorrow we're going to do inorganic. I think that's much better. Greetings, hello to the replay watchers if you're on replay, because I also think it's nicer to be a little bit more concise for it to be digested as per the replay. Not that I'm trying to rush through anything that I'm doing, but on the other hand, if I don't get questions, then I don't need to be here for hours and hours and hours to go over a subject that maybe we can split into two. And I think this way it divvies up the topic pretty well, also allowing room for questions. And of course, if you want to come up and join the conversation, let me know and I'll put a link into the chat. Right, what you're seeing now is actually not happening on my terrace, but I just thought instead of me bubbling away on the screen, it's nice to have a Dendrobium filament bloom. That's what I'm so looking forward to. I know it's it's premature, but I do already look for nubbins. I can't help myself. Anyway, so what we're going to do is start with Sphagnum Moss. So let's get this up on the screen. How I'm going to do this is, yes, I do cover a little bit on the bottom. So I'm going to move us to the right. Everything goes to the right. The screen will be a little bit smaller. But eventually I'm starting to prepare digital documents, which I will have in my store as well. So all these cards that you see here at the moment, they are what I've prepared. I will be working on them in greater detail, but for a live stream and also feedback wise, I can add things, remove things, perfect them, and then add them to my portfolio of digital products for purchase at a certain point in time. Long-term future, I can't do this immediately, but when we start with organic media, I have tried to go, if I remembered my process correctly, something that starts with lightweight to the heavyweight. So if there is any order, that's how I'm going, not because of degrading faster or any other kind of characteristics like that. But you can see I've put in some pros and cons that I feel are correct and that we can work with. And if you would like to add to that, of course, also in the replay, when you leave comments, please always feel free to put in your opinion, because all of that is valuable information for others to read, as well as I could add and expand on these cards, which at this point are in a bit of a skeleton form. However, what we need to know is that moss comes in different qualities, and usually these are called grades. And some producers give moss letter grades like AAA or star grades like 5-star. If it's long, thick, and dense, its absorption properties are higher. Thus, it is considered a higher quality moss. The longer the strand, also apparently, the better it is. Also, the denser the strand, the more water it will absorb, something that is quite important to remember. This is often described as what people call the fluffiness of the moss. So now I've put this into my notes here because a lot of people always talk about the words are hard tonight. The tightly packed sphagnum moss into the pots that we get our Phalaenopsis in sometimes. Mainly we see that in the novelty and the species Phalaenopsis when we buy them new. So I want to, even though I've done videos on this, but I want to talk about why this is okay and why this isn't as water retentive as if you were to put your sphagnum moss loosely into the pot. So think of sphagnum moss as a sponge, and the thicker the sponge, the more it absorbs. And then we see some orchid growers pack their pots densely with sphagnum moss, thinking that this will provide more water for their orchid, but that's not how moss works. So again, the sponge. If you squish the sponge tightly in your fist, then try to water it, the less water the sponge won't be able to absorb as much water because you've got it tightly squeezed, tightly compact in your fist. But if you open the sponge up and then you soak it, the more water will soak into that sponge, and that is the same with sphagnum moss for orchids. Now, that is why often I say, don't worry about how tightly packed the sphagnum moss is in the pot, because one, maybe early in the days they hadn't had it that tightly packed, but the sphagnum moss is, degrading, decomposing, it compacts. That's one of the cons that I've listed. But also, we can see that the roots more often than not are healthy in there. So they're getting the right amount of water and not too much. They're not like drenching or drowning in the sphagnum moss, because as part of the pros of sphagnum moss, there is aeration. We know that, for example, for Catasetinae, we put tightly packed sphagnum moss at the top if we use the PET method, and that is also the way to maybe hold the water down into whatever else is in the container, while the top can dry out relatively quickly because it is tightly packed, avoiding rot at the base. That's why it works, and it's not a danger to the roots. So I won't be mentioning any name brands, but we'll call out some countries that are known for excellent quality. Shirley Holt, Hand Hearts, it's good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you're having a good day. So excellent quality sphagnum moss is obviously the name of the game. This is what we want to be using. And New Zealand moss is one that always comes up in the recommendations, and it by far outranks all the others with a triple A label. But there's also different species. So we've got the cristatum species, that's also the highest quality, and is nominated for the length of its strands, which is favorable if you're going to be repotting neos in the classic style. You want a long strand sphagnum moss, and that would be the cristatum, and it grows in New Zealand as well. There's also the subnitens species, also from New Zealand. You see the trend here. New Zealand has high quality moss. But a lot of sphagnum moss also comes from Chile. I see you, Dania. So that species is Magellanicum, or Magellanic bog moss, if you were to see that on a package. But this species has shorter strands and fibers. However, it compensates for its shortness. It's much more leafy and denser. Some other countries that I didn't know were Wisconsin and Canada also have excellent sphagnum moss. So what about fresh moss? Can we find in the mountain? Yes, you can, absolutely. Just make sure that you wash it out with the cleanest water that you have. Like really, you don't want any minerals. If your tap water is too high in the parts per million, you don't want to be using that. The lowest parts per million water you have, wash it out. And when I say wash it, bring it in and submerge it in water and see if any critters escape, because now they are drowning. Because you don't want to be adding anything into your pots or around your orchids if you're planning to use it as a mount. Minute tiny little snail eggs can be in there, etc., etc. And you want to do that like 2 or 3 times. Really pat it down into that water, and it's like a rinse soak. That's how I would go about it. Fresh moss, that's awesome. So when we talk about fresh moss as well, one of the cons, in my opinion, and again, I am not one of these recycling Nazis, if I could say that word. I don't hound people down with that, but if we're talking about cons, it's unsustainable, because the regeneration of sphagnum moss itself from harvest to allowing it to grow back before harvesting it again takes 6 to 8 years. So I don't know much about where in Canada, but yes, Sandy, that is where some high quality sphagnum moss grows. Now, whether they harvest it because of, there are laws about what you can do with nature, whether they have sustainable growth, harvesting plants, fields, and businesses, I do not know. But Wisconsin and Canada were listed when I did my notes back in the day. So I don't know more details about that. Sorry about that. Anita, it's good to see you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that feedback. It's good to have you here. Thank you. So the harvesting, let it grow, harvest, let it grow. 6 to 8 years, that's why I put it as a con. And also because as the more this is happening, the more demand that it increases, it gets more and more expensive. So depending on the needs of your orchid, you can tightly pack sphagnum moss in the pot, which will not absorb as much water, or you keep it loose, which will increase water absorption. And another positive part about the sphagnum moss is the fact it binds ammonium, and that slows down the decomposition caused by microorganisms, which in a way is counterproductive when we say that the con of sphagnum moss is, for example, that it's got a very short lifespan, because normally what we do with sphagnum moss is keep it, regularly wet, consistently moist and damp. So the degrading and the decomposition is much more accelerated. However, in relation to sphagnum moss's lifespan in our pots, it does slow down the decomposition because it binds the ammonia. Now with sphagnum moss, you can use it in any climate, and I'm talking about the dried sphagnum moss. I could have put in live sphagnum moss, but on the other hand, both of them work the same. Live sphagnum moss will eventually turn dry if you don't have enough humidity. It will just, You have to keep that moist and really, really wet in order for it to thrive on a mount. Drop the humidity, take it out of nature, use it on a mount in a dry climate like mine. That sphagnum moss will easily turn into a crisp until somewhere down the line. It might revive for the duration of the winter, but it's not going to last very long. So when it comes to the climatic influences, if you're in a climate or an environment with high humidity, when I say climate, I use it interchangeably. It doesn't mean outdoor growing. Just consider that terminology. How it flows out of my mouth is to refer to your grow environment, okay? So if you're in a high humidity grow environment, for me, 60%, 70% and up consistently is high humidity, then I would go very, very easy on the moss, especially in and around pots, because if you're working with a wet-dry cycle, which normally is why sphagnum moss is also used in wet-dry cycles, you don't want the pot to be staying too wet because it will absorb the humidity in the air. For dry climates, knock yourself out. Use sphagnum moss all day long, every day, and a lot of it, and then keep that consistently damp as well, and it won't be a problem. In high humidity, some rot issues can occur, especially at the base of the orchid if there's new growths coming, if there's little bracts growing around the base of your new growth. Then high humidity, all that will just compound itself with sphagnum moss. You need to be a little bit careful. But you can also do like a dry top layer of small bark, big bark, whatever it is in those instances if you still want to use the sphagnum moss. If you've got your orchids outside and it is there's a lot of humidity, including a lot of rain, I would shy away from using sphagnum moss only in the pot. Yeah, that's just not going to work out. You might as well then just grow the orchid in hydroponics, because that is literally what you would be doing. It's just wet, 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 wet with no chance of drying out. So just be careful when you use sphagnum moss with high humidity, and always ensure airflow. A dry climate has airflow normally. Let's just say if you're not growing indoors, then of course, outside, it's just going to get dry very, very quickly. And know that you have to also water a lot more often. It is very forgiving on the roots. It's a pain to then unpot, or, at least on a mount, it falls apart, degrades and disappears. Myophyllum, it's just gone. There is no more moss. Whatever's growing on there now is local. But it is forgiving on the roots when it comes to repotting. And yes, it is easily flushed during the new phase of it being in the pot. You can flush it out relatively easy. As time progresses, it gets a little bit harder because, again, one of the cons is that it compacts. Drainage, I know that sounds like, doesn't sound very productive. Sphagnum moss absorbs because we've got that retention as well. But it does drain well because all the fibers are relatively loose when you pot it up on a loose basis and not tightly packed. Drainage can become a problem if you've got your sphagnum moss tightly packed, but then it hasn't absorbed as much water either. Take it easy on the retention of the salts. When it comes to fertilizer, your flushing has to be relatively frequent. All right, don't skip that, because even salts will accelerate the decomposition process. The low pH is a con as well when it comes to, as the sphagnum moss ages and it starts its aging process. Its aging process. The moment it hits the pot and starts to go wet, that is when the clock starts ticking, and that is when your sphagnum moss starts to degrade. So difficult to flush, I've also put at a con, even though in the pro I said, it's easily flushed. But again, the lifespan determines whether it's difficult or easy. All right. So when you see that, you might think that something is contradicting itself. When it comes to organic media, there's always the downside of the media degrading. So sometimes you get one or the other. It's a pro and it's also a con. That is about the lifespan. So water retention, we've touched upon that. We've got water retention as a pro. You see where I'm going. Always consider the degrading process. Right. Next up, let me get our film back up. And if this is going to work out the way I think it is, whew, it's going to be awesome. At least I hope so. So if there's any questions, you can highlight my name using @NinjaOrchids and it'll show up a little bit brighter so that as I'm doing the chameleon look on my screen, I will be able to pick up on those questions. Right now, we are not that many people, but it's a good habit to get into because hopefully one day we will be inundated with people in the live stream. So highlight that name so that my eyes can also adjust to what's going on in chat. Now, Coco Coir. I know. I did a video on this and I thought it was a pretty cool video because, you know, everybody, when they see it coming in their orchid pot, they're like, oh, yuck, I hate this stuff. But I was trying to, yeah, she's beautiful. That was the May blooming of 2022 of my Dendrobium aphyllum. But what I was trying to do with Coco Coir is open up the hearts and the minds when it comes to Coco Coir because it is with us, it is reality, and it is cheap, which is a pro that I've put. It is very inexpensive. It is also sustainable. So, because it is a waste product of the coconut harvesting process in itself. I mean, again, I'm not one of those people that chase people down all woke about, yes, thank you, that's awesome, that works, I can see you. It lights up on my end in orange. At least Ninja Orchids does, and that really, really helps. Thank you, Fernanda. I appreciate that. Hey, Michelle Fiucarino, how do you see, I was so concentrating on how to pronounce your name, I lost the rest of my sentence. It's good to see you. Thank you for being here. Happy Thursday to you too. Excuse me, Le Frog wants to make a visit again. Anyway, so recycling, it's a waste product, but it works for our orchids. So the Coco Coir is all of the material from the husk to the inner shell of the coconut seed that is used, well, it used to be discarded without a second thought. I have to regroup because I'm still laughing at me tripping over my tongue. So it used to be discarded. Now, these brown and white fibers found between the shell, that hard bit of the coconut that we then crack open and eat, and the outer coating of the coconut seed, which is that hard, thin layer, but it's tough. When we knock on it, it sounds like wood. And that is Coco Coir, and it has a lot of applications, and not just as gardening products. But we can also see now all the commercial orchids that are starting to show up on our shelves, in our boxes. They are potted up in this media because it is cheap. And, you know, nurseries, you know, they have a margin that they go by. Sphagnum Moss is getting more and more expensive. Compact some Coco Coir, and you can start messing around with its composition the same as Sphagnum Moss. And it's also, I think I put at the end of my notes that it is a great replacement for Sphagnum Moss. So the pH is something to be a little bit aware of here, even though I put Chris Schmitz, Orchid Ninja, Chris San in the house. Welcome. Hi, it's good to see you. Thank you for taking the time to pop in. Much appreciated. I hope you're having a wonderful afternoon, I'm guessing. So you can see that I've said pH stable, because it is much more pH stable as you would think, even though the commercially available Coir ranges from 5.8 to 6.5. But you see those numbers. When we did the pH live stream last week, we were talking about the sweet spot, 5.8. I go to 7 for reasons, but 5.8 to 6.5, that is awesome when it comes to fertilizing and making sure that our pH is correct in the water. And then we put it into the pot. If we use Coco Coir, it's not going to change our pH. And a long lifespan makes it pH stable, so it's Pretty awesome. It's also very good with buffering humidity. If you're in a dry climate like mine, it is super forgiving on the roots. It just falls off if you're going to be repotting. But there are different grades of moss as well. So you can get it really tightly small shredded, or you can get it with longer strands as well. Even our hanging baskets that we see, that is coco fiber in its long form. It's just been pressed into a shape so that it fits a hanging basket as a liner. So the different grades will also serve a different purpose. And yes, it's good for drainage. But when I put in the cons that it can compact, that is also because it will degrade over time. But the lifespan is approximately 4 years in comparison to sphagnum moss, for example, which, 6 months. I stretch it to 10 months because I'm in a dry climate. If I were using sphagnum moss in a humid climate, you want to be going 6 months. You can push it to 12 months. However, Coco Coir, much cheaper and will last you at least 4 years. So the same thing with environmental influences. If you are in very high humid areas, you want to use a stronger, a larger grade as opposed to small shredded grade. If you're in a very dry climate like mine, I will welcome the shredded smaller grade of Coco Coir. So that is somewhere in my notes. I just ad lib. So let me just check if I've missed something in my notes about Coco Coir. Hang on a second. You see, I've seen my first mistake. Coco Coir is sustainable, and that's why this is not yet as part of my digital product. So Coir is sustainable. I put it in the cons as unsustainable. Correction, that needs changing because it is sustainable being a waste product. Oh no correction. I know what I did there. There is method to my madness. Woo! I got a little bit warm under the collar there. It is unsustainable depending on what you consider waste or a waste of resources, because in order to leach it from its salts, which it naturally has in high quantity because of where the coconuts grow, in paradise, close to the ocean, where there's a lot of salt in the air, they need a lot of water to rinse it, to leach out the salts. So I have sustainable when it comes to purchasing and longevity of the lifespan, but I've also put the con in there. It is unsustainable depending which approach you take. So I thought I made a mistake, but nope, that was the reasoning behind that. Salt buildup, obviously, again, over time, if you don't flush, but because it's so easy to flush through, let's flush is all I can say. Some media is a little bit more difficult to flush, not this stuff. It just pours right through. Okay, forgiving on the roots, we touched that. It is very airy in the pot. I know, surprise when you look at it like that. But because it falls off so easily, it doesn't really compact. When it compacts, it's probably too old, and by that time you'll be repotting anyway, and still it's not going to hurt your roots. It's just that you don't want to suffocate your roots because, let's say, after 6 years of the orchid being in one pot, it might turn to a little bit of a soil characteristics. But unless you're working with inorganic media, I don't think there's anybody out here that is using something like sphagnum moss or, if, for example, Coco Coir with an orchid in a pot for 6 years. Don't know, correct me, let me know. I don't want to be narrow-minded in that aspect. All right, here we go. Let me just check my notes because I do put out notes for a reason. I put in that there are no disposal problems associated with Coir. It's a waste product. We touched on that. It can also deter fungus gnats. Yes, I remember mentioning that in my video. And algae by keeping the surface dry. That is correct. It may dry out at the surface, which is awesome because it will avoid the rot around the base of the orchid. But that dryness avoids fungus gnats and algae from forming. Meanwhile, the pot is still damp, which is what we want. Coir has a lower cation exchange capacity, and it is also high in phosphorus and potassium. And growers switching from Sphagnum Moss to Coir need to check their fertilizer practices if not using an orchid-specific fertilizer. And they need to switch the pH of the solutions to something that accommodates the pH range that Coir naturally has, which is 5.8 to 6.5. So if you're used to pHing up a little bit higher because you're growing in Sphagnum Moss, when you switch that orchid, if you were to switch that orchid into Coco Coir, you don't have to do that anymore. You just go put your fertilizer in. If it's at 6.7, perfect, use it. Your Coir will be able to handle that. There is no swing in the pH. Yes, that's a great idea. Oncidiums will absolutely love it. Now, if you're going to use it for an oncidium that has very big, chunky cattleya roots, then I would add it into the mix as well. But I wouldn't use it only for an oncidium with big, chunky roots. For the fine-rooted oncidiums, fantastic. For the chunky rooted oncidiums, that will be too much media for a very heavy orchid that's also going to push weight down into the pot, Danya. So think about breaking that up if you're going to use it for a chunky rooted oncidium, that you put something into the mix of the Coir so that the weight of the orchid doesn't actually compact the media. And I hope that makes sense. I'm thinking of my Colmonara Masai Red. If I were to pot her up in Coco Coir, I would have to break it up. Those chunky roots, the weight of the orchid, she's enormous. Yeah, she's going to compact it far too quickly. So we've talked about climatic influences, about Coir. Yeah, pretty much. This is your alternative to Sphagnum Moss. I would say Coir away. La! Coir without a C, of course. Anywho, let me just see if after the 11-second lag, if what I said to Danya made sense, because if there are no questions, concerns, objections are also welcome. We can move on to the next one. Let me see. Oh, one of my favorites, one of them that I cannot source, and that is tree fern. Ooh, tree fern. I would love to use tree fern, but I can't. I don't find it here, and if I were to find it, oh boy, I am sure I'm going to pay an arm and a leg for it, and I only have 2 of both, and I need them. Meanwhile, one of them is failing, so macobble here. Okay, goody. Thank you, Tanya, for letting me know. You are very welcome. Right. Now, tree fern fiber is a tiny stick-like material harvested for its use as a substrate for plants and animals as well. So in horticulture, epiphytes, hello, orchids, and other moisture-thriving plants like orchids or ferns find this media compost for retaining air and moisture in roots. I think that this is an amazing media. And let me just have a look at my card before I check my notes, because it is not going to compact. There are, again, different grades, all right? So we can see the long strands opposed to when they, pick them out, the not so good quality, which I'll explain just now, is very, very brittle. You got to handle with care. People say that tree fern degrades quickly, but it is my opinion that it's not the degrading. Degrading is the wrong term for that. It's just brittle. So if you have a tree fern pot that is of a species, I'll get into that, that is not as tough and resistant, then that is going to sort of start falling apart in your hands, not because it's degrading, but because the material itself is relatively brittle. Very long lifespan. It also retains the humidity really well, super forgiving on the roots, even though there may be little black markings and, stains on the velamen. But if you don't want that around your roots, it comes off really easily. I got a cattleya once. She was only in the long needle black tree fern, and it came off relatively easy, left a stain, but I picked it off just out of curiosity. I could have, left the tree fern on the roots and put that into leca. It wouldn't have been a big deal. It is inert, it is super lightweight, everything is fantastic when it comes to tree ferns, easily flushed. I say easily sourced. And then as a con, I put hard to source because it depends where in the world you are. Here in my location in Spain, you don't see tree fern anyway, whereas in the United States, it's readily available. Now, let me put it out there. So far, we're like, woohoo, this stuff is, the holy grail. It's fantastic. And I would use tree fern as opposed to my inorganic mounts. If I could get it, I would be using tree fern. But anyway, know that, however, tree fern also can become acidic over time, but some orchids are tolerant of the increasing acidities, while acidities? I tell you, words are hard tonight. While some orchids are tolerant of the increasing acidity, others are not so much. So the more commonly available Dicksonia mounts, all right, Dicksonia is a species of tree fern, are prone to becoming too acidic. Dicksonia, let me push up my screen. Why are you here? I don't want to see that. So let me just type that into the chat. Dicksonia. Okay. Dicksonium mounts are prone to becoming too acidic, while the Cyathea or Cyathea, however you want to pronounce it, that species, they usually don't seem to cause problems, so just take note or be aware with which species of tree fern substrate you are dealing with or what you're going to be considered using. Now, I'm going to get a little bit more into detail, so in order to keep my words from turning into a delicious word salad that nobody can digest, I'm going to read from my notes here because dyslexia. The sustainability of tree fern is disputed, but the most commonly sold tree fern products on the market today will more likely come from the Dicksonia or Cyathea species. All right, so fernwood or tree fern interchangeably are also common ways to refer to resourceful material. So it is sustainable with the but. Depending on the form in which tree fern wood is processed, it can be considered a tree fern panel or tree fern peat. Again, we're talking about different grades. Always purchase tree fern as a substrate from businesses that are transparent about its practices and are mindful of the environment, because not all tree fern should be harvested. It is illegal in many, many aspects. However, when we're talking about Dicksonia and Cyathea, those are fine, and those are the two that should be either on the packaging, or those are the two that should be mentioned if you were to inquire which species of tree fern you are buying if it's not on the packaging. Now, here we go. Please forgive me. I need to get some water. Hang on a second. Just one moment. I'm muting. Now, here's the thing, and that's why I took down the notes. It will vary in color and texture depending on the species that it is harvested from. The Cyathea species is dark brown and will have a brittle texture to it. This species is often considered a hard tree fern, even though the brittleness sounds a little bit counterproductive. Hey, Andy Land, it's good to see you. So let me repeat that. Cyathea species, I told you I needed my notes for this one. Cyathea species are dark brown and will have a brittle texture to it. This species is often classified as a hard tree fern, even though the brittle, it's more susceptible to snapping. Dicksonia, however, is a little bit more reddish brown. This kind of tree fern is typically softer and more porous than other species and will be classified as soft tree ferns, but it is also much more water retentive than the hard tree fern of the Cyathea. Right. Interesting, if you cannot get tree fern, you can substitute tree fern with Coco Coir or cypress bark, but I don't have cypress bark in my list today. But I had Coco Coir, and here we are. If you cannot get it, use Coco Coir. Similar effect. The only thing is tree fern is a little bit more thicker in its characteristics, more sturdy, not as fluffy as it would be, the Sphagnum Moss replacement. But you can interchange the two if necessary. Now, let's go back to the colors, okay? Because Cythea is the hard tree fern, it will fall apart. So the pots that you see that are dark brown, tree fern pots or tree fern slabs, they will be brittle. That is not degrading. That is not decomposition kicking in. That is because it is a hard tree fern. Dixoniana, back to that again, more water retentive, which is something that you would then want to choose if you're in an extremely dry climate and you've got tree fern at the ready, then opt for the Cythea version. Also, if that's as a slab available for dry climates, that would be a great mount. While both species dry super quickly at the surface of the mounts, if we were going to say that, also at the surface of the pot, inside the mount, inside the pot, everything stays nice and damp for a considerable amount of time, which once again is a big plus when it comes to dry climates. Right. Another advantage here is, I don't know if I put that into the pros, no, but I could probably add it. Just waiting to see the terminology. What can I add in there? Anyway, however, this is interesting when it comes to the tree fern fiber. It contains a higher than normal level of mycorrhiza fungus, which penetrates the orchid root cells, creating hyphal coils or pelotons, which are sites of nutrient exchange accelerating growth. And there you have it. The very, very famous mycorrhiza fungus, which those of us growing in inorganic media will never, ever, ever be blessed enough to have. Even if you were to add it afterwards, it would flush out straight away. There would be no time for them to even form or develop. So I thought that was very interesting. Of course, organic media usually will have and start developing some form of mycorrhiza, but the fact that tree fern has such high concentrations in comparisons to others, I thought that was super interesting. And it's probably another reason why the roots grow so well on it. Alrighty, hoo-hoo. Here we go. We're going to put up the aphyllum again. I dream of a aphyllum. Coming soon, if all goes well, if we don't do anything wrong. And if there are no questions at this point in time, I'm going to close out that window. And we are going to move into, make sure I've spelled that correctly. Bit pedantic about my spelling, and if that were to be a mistake, we're going to move to cork. Not just cork bark for the purposes of mounting, mainly anything that I'm showing today when it comes to the popular organic medias. If you take it in large pieces, you can mount it. If you break them up into smaller pieces, they all serve a different kind of purpose. And one thing that has impressed me since I've seen it, meanwhile, I'm not really that crafty, mine would look all wonky and weird, was the pot that Fernanda Nacimiento Orchids and Succulents made that is just out of cork, as in cork from the bottle. So just because I've got a raw cork piece there on the image, that is not necessarily the only way you can use it. Lots and lots of vino with a natural cork, and you're good to go. You have just drunk your way into a fantastic mount or pot structure. Meanwhile, win-win for the orchid and for you, whoever. Personally, I don't drink that much wine anymore. So let's talk a little bit about cork. You can see the pros and cons on there. I'm just going to refer to some of my notes. Cork is an impermeable, buoyant material. Vino in vino veritas. I've had too much of it in my past. I'm such an honest person now. I don't need more. Totally saturated. It's a buoyant material. If you threw me into the ocean, you could consider me cork because I just float as well. Anyway, excuse me. Oh, I know. My jokes are terrible. Sorry. And I hate it. I laugh at my own jokes. Oh, well. I got to teach Ciliana to laugh on cue. Anyway, now we can see that there's pros and cons. You can see that I've put pros, that it is forgiving on the roots, and yes, it is. And you can see on the cons side, it is unforgiving on the roots, and yes, it is if you ever choose to repot or you have to unmount an orchid from a bit of cork bark. So the roots love it. Let's just put it that way. That's why I use it as a pro as well as a con. Of course, it's easily flushed. The drainage is fabulous. You can even chop up little cork pieces from a wine bottle, just chop them up and throw them into your media mix. Soak them first. You don't want any vino residue on the cork. Or even, let's say, olive oil residue. You want to make sure that there's no oil on the cork, and what you can do with olive oil cork is just scrape off as much of the outer part and see if there's anything inside that hasn't got any kind of oil. You know, the cork goes a little bit darker because of the oil has penetrated into it, but there's a lot of sources out there for cork that you can use at your pleasure and then recycle, and you can give it to your orchids. We've got it as easily sourced, because I do believe that even though one doesn't live in a country where cork grows naturally, I think the internet has pretty much made it something that is easily sourced. And I hope that that is correct and can stay as a pro. There's of course different grades of cork. I prefer the, cork oak, so to speak. Yes, it degrades fast, but if you have it a little bit chunkier, not that fast. Not shredded. Not like cheddar cheese shredded. No, definitely not like Parmigiano. You want to keep it in chunks. That's my opinion, and if I'm wrong on that, then everybody take note of what Fernanda just said. All right. Not cheddar cheese shredded, but if you were to cut it into bigger chunks, if you don't want to throw one single cork size into your pot, if you have a smaller pot, you can cut it into half or into quarters. It should be fine. Right. So the beauty of cork and why it is impermeable is because of a tissue called, what do you call it? Suberin. And suberin is a Suberin is a hydrophobic substance. Suberin functions as a physical barrier. It's preventing water loss from the tissues it surrounds, as well as providing protection against pathogens. It's quite the magical stuff, and it is in abundance in cork. And it also forms a significant component of the wound healing process in plants. Indeed, the main model system to study suberin and the suberization process is the potato tuber. If you slice it and nick it a little bit in the soil, for example, then let's say you're harvesting potatoes and your fork went in a little bit too deep or pierced or just grazed something while you were fluffing things up. And then you look at it after a couple of days, it has nicely healed and calloused over, and you can still use parts of the potato. It didn't rot. The same happens if you're going with squash. The suberization process heals that cut, and it protects the inner side from any form of damage and pathogens. Fernanda said that she used small pieces and it was bad. Okay. All right, Parmigiano, it is Italian, I know, right? And your name, instead of seeing it as tortelli today, I keep thinking tortellini. I always see tortelli. Tonight I'm seeing tortellini. I don't know what that is all about. Oh my goodness. No, I did not have any Italian for dinner tonight. So that suberin is like a Teflon, it's a water repellent, and that makes it like a con when it comes to using cork only or using cork as a mount without anything. If you are in a very dry climate, it absolutely holds no water at all. It is great when it comes to wet, dry growing, but if you have high humidity, it is awesome because then the humidity does the work for you. But you see, there's an ups and downs. However, because of its versatility, there's a lot you can do with cork. At least it won't rot if you pack sphagnum moss around it. It's going to be just fine. At least it won't rot if you bake the cork bark. First, note to self, go and get yourself some cork bark and bake it. And I'm going to do a how-to video on that. Hey, I always remember when it's close to midnight. I promise, I've got it on a post-it and I just don't see it. Anyway, now, just like sphagnum moss, the regeneration of cork bark on a tree, and this is where I'm talking about unsustainable, even though it is kind of sustainable, but it's, I put it into the cons because it takes 10 years before it can be harvested from the tree where it has been harvested without affecting the health of the tree. So that's quite a long time. And that's why I say it's unsustainable depending on demand and all of that business. And that is why a lot of corks these days are a funky kind of, I don't know, hybrid thing of it's not really plastic. It's odd. It's just weird material. Real cork in wine bottles is getting rarer and rarer. No me digas. Tortelli is a kind of, oh my goodness, I didn't know, Danya. I had no idea. I've never heard of tortelli. That's a first. Oh, wow. Interesting. I learned something. Hey, I thought I had my pastas pretty well nailed down, but no, I did not know this one. Yum. Now I know. So that is cork bark. And well, be sure that if you get cork bark, that it is baked. That'll expand the longevity of it exponentially. Know that if you get a piece of cork bark, that weight can be a problem, even though I say that it is lightweight. The material is lightweight. What you put on, if you're using it as a mount, can become the weight. All right, so keep that in mind as you consider cork bark for mounting, that you make sure that it might look ridiculous at first, but when you put an orchid on there and you think, yeah, well, that looks dumb, don't worry about the cork bark. Don't be stingy about it. If you've got an orchid, know that you can leave it on for an indefinite amount of time, as long as the orchid stays healthy, of course. But I'm not going to be slapping all these disclaimers of care and culture into this live stream. But be generous with its size, and you will see that the orchid is going to be just fine and eventually take over your cork bark. And not because I did it on purpose, but a film. Proof is in the pudding. Patetico little sticks. When I got the orchid, I was so bold. I put 3 on a huge piece of cork bark. At that time, I thought it was huge, and it looked rather ridiculous. And yeah, well, here we are. This is 4 years later, and that mount is getting heavy. It wasn't a heavy thing that I bought when I bought it. It is the orchid that has made it very, very heavy. So also take in mind that if you're going to do this and you're going to mount an orchid and you're going to just set it on there and forget it, let it grow, that you make sure your hanger hasn't got the bendy, or that you use a material that will not deteriorate with climatic influences, that one day you come home and your mount is down on the floor, because things can go brittle and start to snap, all right? What I have wired here is reinforced, it's like a reinforced wire that I strengthened by straightening it with a drill, and that kind of reinforced the strength of the wire, and I doubled it. That is what is my hanger for this mount. I'm glad I had the foresight back then to do that. So yeah, okay. Now, let me clear my screen over here. Oh, it's wonderful that you can't see what's going on in the background, because it is a confusion. It is confusion. Because we're going to go on to something that I'm hoping to get more feedback on. I have never used this stuff to my knowledge, but I know that Michael McCarthy has, and if there's anything that I am saying that is wrong, off, etc., I would appreciate feedback in the comments. elaborate more than I can, also because of the experience behind it. So you can see that I've said easily flushed, there is aeration, and the reason I'm putting in aeration is because of what we learned with regard to the Coco Coir. The outer shell, when it comes to cocoa husk chips, the outer shell of the coconut seed, the whole thing, not the nut inside, I'm just checking my verbiage here. The outer, that thing is hard, even though it is a very, very fine layer, it doesn't degrade very quickly. So that makes it like aeration, because it won't compact when it comes to the cocoa chips. Good drainage, water retention. Yes, I say easily sourced, just like with Coco Coir, because it is a waste product, except that you can see the fibers are still attached to the outer shell and everything's just been chopped up into bite-sized blocks. Looks like a canapé there. Something like dulce de leche is what that looks like. Stop it. Anyway, so it's just chopped into bite size, but it's exactly the same as Coco Coir, but not shredded and not separated from that outer hard shell. So we're talking about different grades. You can get them in chunks, or you can get even half a shell, etc. Fernanda Nacimiento loves her cocoa chips. I am glad to hear that. I am always thinking like maybe one day I might go to Coco Chips if I could find them here. I know, bizarro, but I am not going to be buying anything that has to come in shipped by internet. If anything, I'm going to go with what I need to save my bifoliates, and that is going to be what I'm going to find locally. If I could, I would use Coco Chips because, again, I'm in an extremely dry climate. It has a very long lifespan. We learned that from the Coco Coir. If shredded Coco Coir has a long lifespan, believe you me, if it's in chunks like that, the lifespan is exponential. It will not compact, again, because of the outer hard shell is still attached and is maintained on the chips. It is sustainable. We talked about that. It is inexpensive. We talked about that because it is a waste product, and it is pH stable as well, because the majority of it, all it is Coco Coir in a different form. Now, the only thing I did put into the cons, well, there's two things, but I think it is unforgiving on the roots, because the roots love it so much they will actually dive their way in between the separate fibers. So on a repot, it's like, hold your breath, wait for a new root system, and go for it. Just do it. You cannot be, let's say, gentle. It's not a gentle repot when it comes to repotting with cocoa husk. If any of you have repotted orchids that have come with cocoa shells surrounding the root ball stuffed into a basket, you know what I mean. Even though these are broken down into chips and a little bit smaller, know that your root tips are just going to dive in and absolutely love it. But enjoy the process, because you can also go up a little bit on the pot size. You don't have to consider the pot size too much with this stuff. Just make sure that your climate matches what you're doing. Salt buildup is important here, not only because it may not have been leached properly, so you want to be checking that when you clean it. You want to make sure that it goes into your pots with as little parts per million as possible, and possibly you will notice as you are leaching this product right out of the bag that your water is going to be like a dark tea, and that is the tannins leaching out. So not only should they be leaching when they're producing it and cleaning it and bagging it, when you get it home for the orchids, you have to do that again. So you see why I said Coir is a little bit, it's not sustainable, and maybe I should add that here too. But I think that a cocoa husk chip is more sustainable than Coir, in my personal opinion. But make sure you leach it and squeeze it out, and then leach it again and see how little of the tannin results. Yeah, we can say little or a lot depending how we approach the subject, but how little tannin remains after leaching it several times. And it's not just about removing as much tannin as possible, even though our orchids love it, but we want to have a very, very pale brown, bad color. If you look at the color of the picture on the screen, you want that, but 20% of concentration of the color you see on the screen of the cocoa chips. You want it really, really light to make it usable for the orchids. While tannin is awesome, nothing is good for orchids if it is in excess. So while you're leaching tannin, you will also be leaching any additional salts. And then you can rock and roll and potter up and enjoy. Know that over fertilizing, let's just say, let me just qualify that. Know that as you fertilize, salt will build up, but it is easy to flush because of its fibrous nature. So flushing is key. Otherwise, in all organic media and inorganic media, the salt will build up. I haven't used salt buildup in every con because that just gets repetitive. Basically flush. Flush is the key word here. All right, so let me just check my notes. If there's something here that maybe I missed, or if I was talking in circles, I can qualify it and be a little bit more specific. So we've got coconut husks are chipped into small size chips called cocoa chips. Okay, terminology, jargon, it's all one and the same. Now you want to add it to the media, you can add it as an exclusive media, or you can add it to regulate the aeration of the growing medium as an add-on to the mix, and you can use it on its own. I've mentioned that. Now, currently what I've noticed on the internet, I've made a note of that. What I've noticed recently on the internet is that we often see coconut husk chips compared to sphagnum moss because of their rather similar characteristics, especially when it comes to growing orchids. However, due to the outstanding features of cocoa chips and its sustainability and the fact that it does not break down as fast as sphagnum moss, coconut husk chips would be the go-to as a sphagnum moss replacement as well, with the exception of the classic Neo-Phoenicia setup. Nothing will replace sphagnum moss in those instances. But, if you're looking to go for something a little bit more economic and get the properties and the same kind of behavior as sphagnum moss, then Bob's your uncle with cocoa husk chips. Now, when it comes to the climatic influences, just make sure, once again, with regards to what you're doing, if you've got high humidity, just to repeat that, 60% on a consistent basis and above is what I consider high humidity. Make sure that you've got that in place if you're using this stuff. If you're growing outside, make sure that either your orchid is nicely perched above the pot, or you put something a little bit more water repelling around the base of the orchid, because high humidity, a lot of water, rain, everything is absorbed, so rot could be an issue. Very, very careful. I'm not going to put rot into the cons because that would be like, oh my goodness, it causes rot. No, that's misleading. Depending on the climate, it can cause rot, so you want to be careful with that. In a dry climate like mine, when it gets hot and dry, I would love to use this stuff. It wouldn't be a problem. I have a natural dry top layer in all of my pots. It happens very quickly. In winter, it would also be wonderful to use if you don't use heaters, if you're working with like the natural temperatures that nature is throwing at you. It's fine as well in winter if it were to stay wet a little bit longer and doesn't dry out as quickly, because there is no evaporative cooling. It's just, for me, it seems like it's good stuff. Personally, I have no experience with it, but from what I've seen, what I've read, and what Michael McCarthy has said, I would say, and Fernanda also confirms it, I would say go for it if you have never tried it but want something a little bit cheaper, because and we're coming up to the last one. And no, I'm not going to transition into the inorganic, even though they're all ready to go, because I would like to make sure that I answer questions, and we're just going to stick with the organic tonight. But we're going to transition into something that is going to be, it already has, like everything else in this world, it's already gotten to the point of expensive, and that is bark. So you're looking for an alternative to bark, because it's either eggs or bark that you want to put into your shopping cart, because apparently eggs, I don't know, I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know. I'm not buying Fabergé eggs, but they certainly make me feel that way because of how expensive they've gotten. But anyway, if it's going to be eggs or bark, let me tell you, buy your eggs, get yourself some cocoa chips. Your orchids will be fine. The wet dry cycle may not be as pronounced, but trust me, they'll be fine, right? As with anything, when we do anything with our orchids, always wait for new roots before you change the media. Even if you were to change the same media from the orchid and just freshen up the media, wait for new roots. The moment you change the media, the new roots won't even care about what they're growing into as long as they get water, they get enough hydration, and they get enough fertilizer. Dania Toteli says, I have 70% humidity in winter and 40 in the summer. Do you think I have to add bark on top? Bark on top. Bark on top of cocoa husk, because that's what we were just discussing. No, I don't think that you do. Not in your case. I don't think that 40% is low enough unless you've got hot wind to combat. And then I would not add bark because then you would be needing to pick that off once you go back to 70% humidity in winter. So it could be something you could do as an interim. I would actually just resort to putting either, paper towels around the surface because they will degrade in time as well, as long as they're not, including bleach. But if you were to put paper towels on the top, Iwi Barcode, it's good to see you. Nice. You always use bark. That's good. That's fantastic. So I would actually say instead of wasting your bark and then not knowing what to do with it for the winter because, you don't want to be sharing it with another orchid, it'd be a shame to waste it, I would use paper towels. And when that goes dry, just make sure the paper towels on the surface stay damp, and that will help also buffer what is going on in the pot, and I hope that makes sense. I know I come across as stingy, all right? But that is just me, the way I operate. I was brought up in a climate and an environment, you just don't waste anything. Not because I was brought up in Kenya and not because I saw, unfortunate people. I was brought up in this with a high regard of my surroundings and taking care of my surroundings, leaving my surroundings as best as possible the way I found them. And that includes, when it comes to resources. So that is why I always talk about saving and making sure that we can use other alternatives. Flushing EV barcode, flushing. So that's why I'm always going down that road. I'm not trying to impose anything on anybody that somebody's not comfortable. But when you, let's say, have 15 orchids and then 10 of those need something on the surface to buffer against a dry top layer, times 10, that material you're putting on, is that going to be thrown away? Or if you put something inorganic on it, then you can pick it off and then you can sterilize it and reuse it. But if you're not going to put inorganic on it because you don't know if roots are going to grow in and through and you don't want to be picking away and disturbing roots, a paper towel will do. That will degrade over a period of time. Flushing, EV barcode. Flushing means the cleanest water that you've got and you pour it through the pot fast. Literally, you can flood the pot, not go above your new growths, but you pour it around the pot. In my Everything Semi-Hydros playlist on YouTube, that is where you can see a video about flushing. Literally what you're doing is cleaning out the salt, the excess salts, also the toxins that orchid roots do produce. Everything accumulates in there, especially when it comes to organic media. You want to keep the media clean, free of salts, so it doesn't burn the roots, and add oxygen back into the pot. And if you pour water through that, just clean water, nothing else, then you will be achieving that. More important during the summer months. Yes, and that's what we're going to be. You're very welcome. So then you say, but the inorganic media like lava rock has got dirt if they are natural. That is very true. And I also have some videos on how to clean things, because I'm not like I'm a clean freak, but when it comes to my orchid pots, there's enough debris that's going to end up at the bottom of the pot anyway. So the media has to go in as clean as possible. And tomorrow we are going to be discussing inorganic media. At the beginning of the live stream, I said that I'm going to be breaking this up into organic tonight and tomorrow inorganic media. So yeah. Meanwhile, here's the thing. When you get your bark out of the pot, out of the bag, when you get it new, it's going to be dusty. Now, some people, myself included, washed their bark and used it wet to repot. That is what I used to do. My bark was in a bucket with water, and as it, let it float up. I didn't wait for it to sink. That wasn't the point. But all the little debris and the nasties, they sunk. So at the top, I had what I presumed to be clean bark, and I used to fish it out. Now, not everybody likes to do that. They like to work with dry bark, which is also fantastic because it also falls more naturally into all the crevices. I prefer to work with my roots damp, my media damp, and then I could just leave the orchid alone in my reasoning, I don't want to bother the orchid after a repot for as long as possible. If my media is already damp, I don't have to shuffle and scoot her around in order to pick her up, water her, soak her, or whatever I used to do in the past. So if you're using dry bark, know that if it's new out of the bag, it is super dusty and the pot needs flushing, because all that dust and everything, it will accumulate in the pot and it will increase the decomposition process as well. So whether you wash your bark or not, whether you want to do dry media when you repot or not, if you have time, if you're not in a hurry, take the batch of bark you're going to be using for repotted, give it a good rinse under the tap, and then just put it away, let it dry. At least you've got some of it off. Okay, Shirley said that your favorite is bark. I'm sorry, that comment is just way up there, Shirley. I missed that. I'm so sorry. Got to get used to scroll with my eyes. Got to get used to that. That depends the kind of rock, my local rock. Yes, and it's porous in English, but it's fine. We understand porous. It's good job. It's good. It is. Absolutely. Your rock is porous, and we'll discuss that mañana. When in Spain, mañana. Yes, and some people do use lava rock for cymbidiums, and it's fine. Depends where you're growing your cymbidium. You may have to use any kind of inorganic media, porous. Let me write that in there, porous. Casi igual como poroso. How can we be sure that it should be? Dania Tortelli, it has, look, if somebody, you're welcome. Dania, if you're buying bark and it is for media, even if it's for landscaping, it has to be sterilized. It has gone through a hardening process, which also includes a bit of heat. I don't know how they do it, flash heated, I don't know. But that it is sterilized. Otherwise, if moisture gets in there with some low quality orchid media that you get sold here, there's some humidity in the bag because they poke holes in it for aeration, of course. What they forget is during transport, condensation and all that happens. Shirley, bon appetit, buen provecho. Have yourselves a wonderful dinner. Thank you so much for being here. So appreciate you taking the time to join in. Delish, nom nom nom. After we've gone through quite the menu today. So now, any bag should be sterilized, period. There should be no exceptions. If the bag has been compromised, condensation has done its thing, you might find some little mushrooms or mold growing. That doesn't mean that the bark wasn't sterilized when it left the manufacturer, the wholesaler. That means the bag was compromised, and that is a shame. But that will happen with heat and humidity, and it sucks when that happens. And we open the bag, and it already has that familiar smell that it should be. The bark should smell dry and dusty when you stick your nose in it. It shouldn't smell damp-ish. I'm not even saying damp in a sense of sauna damp. I'm just saying there's a difference between I got to sneeze as opposed to like, oh no. There's a fine balance between the two reactions. And also some people, they grow, well, it works really well, EB barcode, because Cymbidiums are terrestrial, semi-terrestrial. They're not necessarily epiphytes. You can get some Cymbidiums that are growing on trees, and then that species, you just need to know if it's in the parentage. But you can put your Cymbidium, if you own your land around your property, put it into the garden, throw in some lava rocks at the bottom. All they need is great drainage. Dig the hole, lava rock as the drainage, and then fill around with a little bit of orchid bark mixed in with your turbo, your garden soil, and then pack up your Cymbidium. She'll be happy. Make sure to water though if you don't have a lot of rain at some periods of the year. Make sure. But yeah. And usually you will get Cymbidiums delivered in the garden centers in Coco Coir. So we discussed that right at the beginning. I have the rewind setting on if you want to rewind to get that. So you buy the one for landscaping, that's big pieces, and you'll break them down depending the size of your orchids, and done. That's great. Because I have to get myself some bark. It is big pieces only. I can't get smaller pieces, and then I'm going to have to break them down. Yep. It's going to be a whole thing. Ugh. But anyway, my Zagarrigue wax is in much need. But again, I've got time. Not yet. Now's not the time. So we pretty much discussed bark, but let me just check my notes. Oh, I have a little joke in my notes. Excuse me, excusi. But I do want to add it. Orchid bark is bark for orchids, not bark from orchids. Does that make a sense? Huh? I hear, oh goodness me, I know, it's dumb. Okay, again, you see, I laugh at my own jokes. What can I say? Excuse me. I love it when you say, we'd call cork bark, we call it tree bark, and everybody says orchid bark, and I'm always thinking, well, I used to, I'm not that childish anymore, but I had to add it tonight, so maybe I'm still a bit childish. But when I used to hear people say orchid bark, my head goes, orchid doesn't have a bark. Anyway, sorry. I got that out of my system. Talk about falling into that one. Anyway, maji. Maji is Swahili for water. Excuse me. All right. Anyway, orchid. The bark used for orchid. I was about to say orchid bark. The bark used for orchid is actually sourced from a variety of coniferous trees. So the most common is fir bark. I'm only repeating what I read research-wise because I haven't used fir bark ever, to my understanding. Back in the day when I was working with bark, I used to buy about 10 or 15 bags to repot maybe 5 orchids, but I would sift and strain out everything that was nasty in the bag and pick out everything that I could use for my orchids. So it's such bad quality here. I don't know what it's like now, but I can't imagine anything's changed. Anyway, fir bark apparently is the common choice as it breaks down much slowly, and you want to have obviously a bark kind of source that breaks down slowly. I've also heard from many people now over the internet, Fernanda's mentioned it several times, that the famed Orchiata bark is also starting to break down faster. So you see, that's why I put into the cons, it's unsustainable. And it's unsustainable because obviously the bark cannot replenish itself quick enough as the demand is out there, because I'm not just talking about orchids. There's a lot of other reasons why people use Orchiata bark, because it is such great quality also for terrariums. So demand is high and the resources can't replenish themselves fast enough for what's out there. So unsustainable. Anyway, it's hard for you to find large bark. Well, there you go. All I get is large chunks, and I'm going to have a field trip trying to break that apart. It sure is going to be interesting. I might have to use my paper cutter. I get that one, my guillotine, get that out. What are you doing? I've resourced everything and refurbished everything to go for my orchids. Now I'm going to take my guillotine out. Oh, goodness me. Anyway, the con, it, sometimes you find big bags of bark, but it's so small. So I'm assuming your bark, the bags are small. Well, I have big. Oh, you have, okay, okay, I get what you're saying. You have big bags of bark, but the pieces are so small. Well, I don't know. Oh, wow. I'll trade a bag that I'm going to be buying and it's just big chunks. We can do a bark exchange. I've got this, what you got, like if we were neighbors. Hello, can I borrow some of, not borrow, but can I have some of your small bark in exchange for big bark? Let's see what my garden center has next time I go there. But when I put into the cons lifespan, please don't think that I don't think 3 years is a short lifespan, but it is a con because, again, organic media breaks down. No, right, Andy? Deal. You got it. Can I sell bark? I can't sell bark. I wish. Can you imagine? Come on, I'm selling bark. Goodness me. People here, actually, my gardener didn't even know what I was growing when I moved in and the orchid collection started. Oh, to you? I may do that because, of course, I can't do free shipping and anything like that, but I could. I could think about it. I'll make sure to post some pictures of what is available in my garden center on my community posts, and then we'll see if I've got any takers. I mean, I can take a hammer to lava rock. I can't take a hammer to bark. But anyway, so yeah, lifespan I did put into the cons. Organic media will break down, so that needs to be taken into consideration. I find it unforgiving on the roots, except, of course, in the pros. I've also put it is forgiving on the roots because the roots just climb over it and do really, really well. I put unforgiving as a con because when it comes to repotting, ooh la la. All right. So it doesn't just fall off easily, even if you dampen the roots. Well, repotting is never really a gentle thing, except if you use Coco Coir or Sphagnum Moss, depending. I find it unsustainable. It retains salts if you don't flush. You got to be super careful with that. You can easily flush it. That makes it a con. Humidity, it will makes it a pro. Sorry, easily flushed makes it a pro. Humidity is raised because it stays a little bit damper for longer, depending on the size of the bark. Of course, seedling bark staying wet much longer as opposed to chunky bark staying, drying out really quickly. It is a perfect medium for if you like the wet dry cycle setup method. I can cut the large bark pieces with the scissors. Okay. Okay. I'm talking fist size bark. The size of a fist size bark. I would love to cut those with the scissors. Oh, I'm not so sure. But again, I don't need many. I only need for 2 pots. So, but definitely I got to look into that. It's just a couple of, I know, right? It's just a couple of weeks ago, I went to the garden center and I was like, oh yeah, okay, good. They've got bark. And I saw the size. I'm like going down the row. Too big, too big, too big, too big, too big. I'm like, are you kidding me? They've got all this beautiful bark and there's no smaller, but fist size. We'll see what happens. We'll see. At least I've got a source that looks really good stuff. Makes me excited in a way because I didn't have anything wrong. I didn't necessarily. I don't hate bark or organic media. I don't hate it. You would think the way I'm harping and going on about inorganic, but no, it's just it was never there for me to repeat, especially when I was always wishing for lecker. But anyway, so we've got water retention depending on the size of your bark, and it's lightweight. Bark for decorative purposes. Okay. Okay. I'll look. I'll look. So I put lightweight, and you're probably wondering as we went You use a pincer? What is a pincer? Please tell me, Daniel, what you use. What is a pincer? I was going to take a screwdriver, stick it through the middle of the biggest piece, and then hammer and split it, like you do granite, and do that and try and repeat, at least to get it lengthwise, at least to get it to a size. And maybe then I can use a pair of scissors or my secateurs. That's sort of where my thought process was going. I've been to a marble quarry and I've seen how they've done it. I thought that could work for my bark splitting method. So I put water retention. We've talked about that. We've talked about different grades. I think I put easily sourced because, even if we don't get it locally, we can get it over the internet. It is a moisture buffer. The smaller you go, the longer it stays wet. And the larger you go with the bark, of course, it doesn't so much. But it works beautiful for aeration, and it works beautifully as an add-on so that, if you need to break up your sphagnum moss a little bit, then you can add bark in all different kinds of sizes in there just to keep the sphagnum moss from compacting. Bark from alive trees, I wouldn't recommend it because either that it is a fir. Secondly, it is far too fresh. There would be too much residue. Sometimes especially be careful with trees that have a lot of resin in them. Those are definitely not any kind of barks that I would recommend any time to put into an orchid pot. So if you have the correct bark from a tree, make sure that you let it cure in hot sunshine with no water for a long, long time. And actually wash it off first. Before you do that, wash it off with an iron brush. Do something in such a way that you're literally washing everything off of that bark, everything that is loose, everything. Tenaza. ¿Qué es tenaza? Espera. Hang on a second. But yeah, you've got to clean that bark thoroughly and then not use it immediately. It has to cure, and I would say at least 6 months in the hot sun, and probably a year would be best in the heat. My opinion. I'm always very cautious about what is being brought out from nature. Tenaza? A ver. Tenaza. Pincers. Tweezers. Yes, okay. You use tweezers to separate bark. Okay. Huh. Is that what we've been? Huh. Okay. I'm gonna have to, that has to percolate in my brain. Oh, and one thing I wanted to mention with regards to the con, be careful with the bark that you've got in your pot. You need to make sure that you keep checking your pH because it might look nice and tough and everything looks perfect visually, but our eyes cannot discern how the pH is responding in the pot. So you want to make sure that your pH is still stable and it is actually doing what you want it to do with a fertilizer or supplement solution when you pH your water. So chunky bark especially, even seedling bark still looks awesome. And then you unpot an orchid and you can literally snap it between your fingers and that's already far too gone. So don't trust your eyes, but make sure that you do regular pH tests in your pot. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is my most popular orchid media when it comes to organic media. Now, the question, of course, being, is that all? Is there more to what I've just said that is popular? Because we can go into all kinds of different variables and different, how we can, variables and see whether there's others. So leave that in the comments if you think I've. Evie, it was nice to see you. Adios, muchas gracias. I appreciate that you joined us for a short while. Really good to see you. Missed you last week, but it's nice of you to hop on. Have a fabulous evening. So, again, these are popular, the keyword being popular as opposed to this one, that alternative, such and such. And tomorrow with the inorganic media, I'm also going to be using the popular ones. So, seguro, aquí estoy. So at the end of the day, let me know in the comments if you're watching this on replay or right now in the chat if there is something I missed that you consider popular, because I would love to explore that further and broaden my own horizon as well. Other than that, questions? Anything at all? Anything along those lines? Because if not, I feel as though maybe I answered the questions while I was talking. Let me know. Does anybody want to come up as well? That is an option, especially the splitting of bark with tweezers. I would love to know how that works. Maybe, Danya, if you don't want to come up and talk about it, you can leave that in the comments when the video goes on public after it has finished processing. Andy Land picked up his Chrysocentron yesterday. It is small, but arrived with a small key. Aww. Chose to put it in the basket with Sphagnum Moss. Good stuff. How cool is that? Well, welcome, little Chrysocentron, to Andy Land, and I'm sure you're going to be super, super duper happy there. Thank you very much for coming, Andy Land, and everybody else as well. Thank you so much for coming. I shall call it then. I think that we can end at an hour and a half. Not that I can't keep on yapping away, but we don't need to extend something. Thanks to one of your videos, I found out my leca floats. Okay, right. Yes, oh, I can. Sandy, yes, you're right. I can get cocoa chips in pet stores. That might even be the better option. Ooh, thank you. And they have smaller bags. I will look. Actually, no, I'll send my daughter. This way I can stay home. Anyway, thank you. Goodness me, if that was one of your comments right at the top, Sandy, I was thinking, what is she talking about? Because I had already moved on to the next thing. So thank you for putting that in the comments again. I appreciate it. Okay, so you found out that your leca floats. Yeah, that sucks. How long have you been soaking your leca? How long, Danya, have you soaked your leca in order for it to do that? And the next question is, how long have you boiled it? Have you gotten it to a boil to see for 10-15 minutes to see, and then see if it sinks? Thirdly, did you put it into water, just only rinsing the dust off? Because if that is the case, maybe it needs a lot of time before it starts to sink. It should be maybe 5 days. You boiled it for 10 minutes. Oh my goodness, I am so sorry. That is great media now for aeration. If you've got organic media that you use in pots, that is not for hydroponics. Yes, you've done it all. Just the fact that you boiled it, it should have sunk by now. I am so sorry. That is not going to be for self-watering or anything like that. It won't wick. Ah, that's awful. I hated that when it happened. I was so excited with my first batch. And then that happened. And I was like, oh no, here we go. Here we go. So what you need to do is, I don't know if you bought it at your local garden center or over the internet, but I'm not even sure where you are, Danya. I don't want you to, if you want to email me on that, because I have the brand from Portugal. It's called Ciro. Yes. And you know what? You know what? They should actually, oh, leca is not leca. And it makes me cross that they don't specify it on the bags. That's so naughty, because it's the same here in Spain. It's just I was looking visually after, because my first brand said lekker. I'm like, okay, here we go. And it is lekker, but it's not what we want. It's not what we can use. It's great lekker for aeration, for landscaping and whatever, you know, make a footpath, etc. So they should specify for hydroponics. So the next time I looked visually to see what I'm buying. Oh, this is terrible when you buy so many and then it still does that. Ugh, I am so sorry. It's so frustrating. If you go to a hydroponics store maybe and you insist you want the stuff that wicks, and then if it doesn't, the stuff that wicks and sinks. And don't let them look at you weird. You just tell them, I want my lekker to sink after I've boiled it. Never mind how they look at you. If they say they don't know, then ask them for like 2 cups as a test to take home and then test it. They should let you do that, especially a specialty store. And if it's hydroponics, normally they should just sink. Oh, that's so frustrating. I feel you. But yeah, you feel free to email me and then we can take it from there, because I don't want you to say your location, but we can talk about that a little further on. And maybe even tomorrow, if by that time something has cleared up, you let me know as well, because tomorrow, domani, we're going to inorganic media. In the meantime, I'm going to call it. Thank you so much for being here, everybody that was here. I so appreciate your support. If you haven't hit the like button, I would really appreciate if you could just do that one thing for me. And considering that we're touching on subjects that are a little bit more elaborate, it would be so amazing if people would share the links out and see if we can get some more people into the live stream, as well as bring more attention to the channel. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. I have a little target in my brain for 2023. I'm hoping that with help and support that we can get there. I am not talking monetary support. I'm just talking spread the word that I exist here in southern Spain. Thank you. Oh, Fernanda Nacimiento coming in last minute, clutch. Stop sending me stuff, because you know it won't just stop with just cocoa chips. Stop it. Sorry, I'm gonna. Oh. Sorry, but started laughing again so hard. Anyway, we'll see you tomorrow. Spread the word. Let them know I exist. Your support here right now. Know that I don't take it for granted. And everybody that watched on the replay, same thing to you. Thank you so much. I'll see you tomorrow, hopefully. If not, hopefully in the comments on the replay. Same time, same place. Much love to you all. Stay safe and take care. Bye.